Welcome to the Strive podcast, where we embark on a captivating journey through the realms of mind, medicine, and motivation. I'm Cy Mundham, your host, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Noah Kaufman, an emergency medicine physician, entrepreneur, and Bitcoin philosopher whose career defies convention. Known to many as the Ninja Doc from NBC's American Ninja Warrior, Dr. Kaufman has spent over 2 decades on the front lines of emergency medicine, experiences that shaped his outlook on risk, purpose, and human potential. Beyond the ER, he's the author of Self-Actualization, a philosophy of Bitcoin, where he explores how sound money can serve as a moral framework for self-actualization and systemic reform. Dr. Kaufman's ventures span medicine, finance, and technology, from building CryptoPulse, a financial education platform for physicians, to launching Starbot, a digital asset technology company, and even co-founding Physician Tax Solutions to help doctors achieve financial freedom. In this episode, we explore how medicine has shaped Dr. Kaufman's worldview, how Bitcoin connects to self-actualization and morality, why both healthcare and fiat money suffer from misaligned incentives, and how physical performance, entrepreneurship, and philosophy all intersect in one integrated life. Don't forget to like, follow, and share this episode to keep up with the inspiring conversations we bring. For more updates and exclusive content, follow us on Instagram or X at @strive_podcasts and on TikTok at @SimondhamOfficial. Join our community and be part of the journey to explore mind, medicine, and motivation. Hi, Dr. Kaufman.
Cy, it's great to be here. Thank you. You've done your homework. I appreciate the introduction and the invitation to the podcast.
Definitely. And thank you so much for finding the time to meet with me today. I'm super excited to be talking with you about all the things that I just laid out above. And yeah, I think it's very interesting and cool to find someone at the intersection of all the different things that you do. So I'm very excited to get your perspective on a bunch of different things.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been quite the journey, and I think, as you mentioned, it's been unconventional, which has put me in the crosshairs from time to time. But I've always enjoyed in my life the original thinkers, the authentic thinkers, and I'm just doing my best to stay true to my moral compass and what I've observed and what I've seen in this life.
Definitely, and that's definitely an inspiration for people coming up in the field too, like me. So thank you for what you do. Just starting off, in terms of like seeing how medicine shaped your worldview, what first drew you to emergency medicine, and how has the last few decades on the front line shaped your approach to life and risk?
Yeah, risk is a funny question. I mean, this whole journey started obviously when I was born, but when I was like 2 years old, I had a Fisher Price medical toy kit from my parents with the little toy stethoscope and otoscope, and I used to look in my brother's ears and all and pretend to be a doctor. And I wanted to be a doctor ever since I could remember. And I think what brought me to emergency medicine was a couple things. But first, having two younger brothers, we were always in and out of the emergency department, getting stitches, broken bones from fighting. And my brother once punched me through a window when I trapped him out on the roof, and he cut open his arm real bad. And it was just like nonstop shenanigans with three wild boys. And so ultimately, I had a couple formative experiences. Like one time, I was shot in the face with a pellet gun, and I went to the ER, and I was like, I had no idea what was going on. I had blood coming out of my face, out of my nose, out of my mouth, and of course, my mother was freaked out. And the ER doc he just looked at us and he was like, "Hey guys, look, you don't need to worry unless I look worried." And that line kind of always stuck with me. I've actually used it now as an ER doc. And the X-ray, there was no CT scan really when they were doing this. The X-ray showed the pellet right in the middle of my kind of like frontal view and side view, lodged right underneath my skull at the back of my posterior pharynx. And they were talking about surgery and how they were going to get it out because it was a lead pellet. And eventually, somehow miraculously, I coughed it up because it must have been lodged in my posterior pharynx, like in the soft tissue, and swallowed it. They just made sure I passed it, and everything worked out after that. But that was one of the things that really made me want to go into emergency medicine. And then, of course, my reasons changed over time. But yeah, it's been a fascinating journey.
Yeah, and well, that's crazy. I'm glad you're okay now, but
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild, and I guess like a lot of experiences that we have in our personal lives kind of drive our purpose and motivation for doing the things that we do. So it
Yep.
makes a lot of sense for how you approach that. How has your experiences within the ER, just you see a lot of these acute cases, and in your case, fortunately, it went well, but a lot of times in the emergency room, things don't go so well, right?
Right.
And you have to constantly deal with that, and that's a thing that you have to internalize, take with you as you keep practicing medicine and see more patients in the future. How have those experiences shaped your worldview on things?
Well, we practice medicine, but in a lot of ways, we are also shepherds for people at cataclysmic, transformative times in their life that they're going to remember forever. Times when when our realities are ripped apart. You're going around your daily life, you create a life, of pretty much the way you want to create it, hopefully of joy and happiness and love and comfort for most people. But in any event, you create, a life and a pattern. And basically, that is all ripped apart suddenly by a horrible, tragic car accident or a heart attack or stroke or a bullet or something that changes everything. And there's not only the healthcare aspects of that, but there's the psychological aspects of that and the adaptation to change. And everyone in your family and perhaps in your social bubble experience that to some degree, with the most being yourself. And so, being an emergency room physician and witnessing the broad scope of tragedies that can happen and miracles and of the human condition has really been a privilege and an honor, sometimes frustrating, sometimes difficult. But, I'll say that after 5 years after you're out of training, the medicine itself becomes really pretty easy. And then by 10 years, you've seen almost everything. There's always something hiding and lurking that's going to test your problem solving and creativity as a professional. Uh, but the thing that doesn't get any easier, ironically, is actually the emotional and psychological aspect of this. So, that has always been an area where I think physicians can improve and do improve over their career. And philosophically, it's led me to maybe a unique understanding of this world, my place in it, and the temporary nature of it all. I mean, it really happens quick. It's fascinating.
Yeah, definitely, and that I can see how that can have such a big emotional and psychological toll as well. And there has to be some ways that people have to de-stress or have avenues for being able to deal with that. And I guess it gets better with time as you see more of these, and you're able to figure out and learn how you're able to tackle these emotional challenges. One way people do that is working out, exercise, but that's another avenue that you have taken to great heights and achieved great things with. When I was doing my homework on you, like we talked briefly about how the Bitcoin and the independent practice, that kind of stuff, kind of drew me to like reaching out. But I did not realize that you were the Ninja Doc too on funny story. I was huge fan of American Ninja Warrior. I would watch that, throughout like elementary, middle school, right? And I'm
Sure.
definitely sure that I saw you on one of those episodes, the episode that aired with you. I remember like the phrase Ninja Doc as like, I don't know exactly what happened with like that specific event that I saw you on American Ninja Warrior, but I definitely remember the term Ninja Doc. And I don't know, it just feels like a 360, or just like, the world works in weird ways, in that we're able to talk like this now. So I
Yeah.
just want to, like ask you, like, how did that happen? How were you able to get into, that part of your life, and how has that shaped you?
Well, there's a couple interesting things and an interesting story I'll share. And there's I was reading this interesting post about there's all these different kinds of luck, right? There's blind luck, which is what you're born into, the resources, the privilege, all these things. But then there's the luck that's kind of created through your life by exploring opportunities, learning, putting yourself out there, that sort of thing. So I got lucky because I was a climber, a very high level climber. I was climbing extremely strong. I was competing professionally. I had been sponsored, and this was all a backseat to medicine. But I still continued to do quite a bit of climbing. And one of my very close friends, Brian Arnold, got on. He's just a great, great guy, and he's just a go getter. And he saw Ninja Warrior, and he was like, I could do that, and I could do a very good job at it. And I think he took like second place that first season. It was like season 2 or 3. I think they're on like 18 or 20 or something crazy now. But he tried to get me to do it. I was like, no, 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 no. I'm an ER doc. Like, what? I'm not going to do Ninja. And then, but the next year he was like, last year was like the funnest thing, and I saw him take second place, and I was like, all right, maybe I'll do it. You could win $1 million. You could play on this world class giant, obstacle course. And as a climber, I thought it would be super fun. And as an ER physician, considered that for most of the competitors, and what I had heard was that the nerves get to them, that the course isn't actually like super hard, especially if you have decent grip strength. It's just you get one shot, the cameras are rolling, and nerves eat people alive. I was like, well, I'm an ER doc, I'm like literally drilling holes in people's heads. So what do I care about? Like, nobody's dying. This is going to be just fun. And I was right. And so it enabled me to do pretty well on the show. Actually, the first season I did it in LA, Long Beach or Muscle Beach. Anyway, and one of the other competitors, he was a chiropractor, and he was on this obstacle where you had to put your hands out and push against an obstacle, like inside of a door frame, as it was going down a slide. And he fell off and he dislocated his shoulder in the process. Well, I was an ER doc in Tahoe, and I was used to anterior shoulder dislocations and putting them back in, and I was very good at it. So I jumped the line. I was about to go. I was about to be like the next competitor, and they were like, "Stop, stop! You can't cross this line." And but we were in LA, and I figured an ambulance would take like 45 minutes, an hour. And he looked pale as a ghost, holding his shoulder. I knew how much pain he was in, and I knew that these things are like much easier to put back in if it's done quickly. And so, and he was a big, bulky guy. I knew he didn't fracture it. He didn't hit anything. And so I just jumped the line. I ignored the crew, ran up to him, and his name was Alan Keneally. And I was like, hey, I'm Noah. I'm an ER doc. And you want me to put this back in? And he was like, oh, please, please. And he was suffering. And I put it back in, and luckily it went pretty smoothly and nice, very satisfying thunk. And it went back in, and he was like, "Oh, I love you," and he was able to move his shoulders around. I was like, "Okay, well, hold your arm like this." And we turn around, and they've got cameras everywhere. And it might have been the first time on like some kind of reality TV show where they showed a shoulder reduction in real time. And then they let me run, and I finished the course. So it was like I got to be like this ultimate hero that night. It was really fun. And I'll never forget that experience. And then, years later, it kind of came full circle for me after doing 7 seasons of Ninja Warrior and being the Ninja Doc. And I never won. I did win some money, and, I got quite far. And, but I'll never forget one night in the ER, like 5 years later. It's 2 a.m. We're waiting on a level 1 trauma. A man was shot in the chest, is all that we heard. We had the whole trauma team ready at the medical center of the Rockies. And this guy comes in, the ambulance is rolling in, and he's shot in the chest, and he's holding his bullet, and he's moaning, he's playing the part. I mean, he's shot, and everybody's gowned up and ready to go. And I didn't have a mask or anything on yet, and he looks over while they're wheeling him into the trauma bay, and like in front of 20 people, and he just breaks character, and he's like, "Wait a second, I saw you on Ninja Warrior. You're the Ninja Doc." And like it was such a surreal moment because he's shot in the chest, ostensibly dying, and everybody's like standing there. And so half the people, half the nurses and docs are like eye roll. And then it was a very interesting but funny, kind of non-serious, polarizing kind of a life event to be involved in the TV show. But we rolled him in, threw in a chest tube, and he made it. He was fine. It was just kind of this surreal moment that I'll always remember. And so ninja and medicine did intertwine, and there were several more examples, but it was really a fascinating chapter of my life.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Very inspiring as well. Um, and somewhere along this way, you also got interested in Bitcoin. Could you tell me how that journey started?
Yeah, well, ironically, it ties together very well because one of the American Ninja Warrior competitors, I had heard about Bitcoin from early on because I always bought a little gold and a little silver, and I had a series 65, like a financial advisor type certificate from earlier in my life before medicine. And I never really practiced as a financial advisor, but I just thought it would be good to learn about finance and the economy and whatnot. And so I heard about Bitcoin, and obviously, just like everyone else, thought it was just a scam or internet money, kind of fake air, vaporware. But then one night shift, everything good happens on night shifts. One slow night shift, one of my good friends who was a ninja, the Godfather. We were talking, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you have to buy Ethereum and Bitcoin. They're the future. You have to look into it and understand it." And this was 2015. Um, and so on that night shift, I opened like an account. I forget, it was Coinbase or Kraken or whatever it was, and put $1,000 in there and just bought a whole bunch of stuff. And it, of course, it all went to the moon. And I didn't know what I had. I sold most of it thinking I was a genius. And then, bought back in because it kept going up. And then it all crashed in 2017 or whenever it was. And, I was like, dang, I'm not good at investing. And I really kind of figured it out during COVID. During COVID, we all had all of a sudden a lot more time. And during COVID, I really sat down and started to think about it. I bought a bunch of gold and silver. I saw everything crashing and the stock market crashed. And I knew enough to know that there's always more money in the system, and the money is like the tide. It goes out and it goes into like bank accounts and under mattresses and stuff, and then it goes back in and goes into assets, and everything always goes up in value. It's like the biggest Ponzi scheme ever, right? Like, we know inflation is going up, stocks are always going up, the cost of houses the cost are going up, and of course the notional costs are going up, not the purchasing power. And so people are always trying to spend their money, and assets are always inflating, like always over the last 100 years. And the whole system is predicated on that. And so, I was always looking at alternative investments, and things really clicked for me during COVID. Listening to some of the prior Bitcoin philosophers, and I was like, wow, this actually might be something. And so, I've still been very weary of Bitcoin maximalism, or like the cult that surrounds Bitcoin, the religion of Bitcoin, which certainly there is to some degree. But I started going on podcasts in 2019 with Kevin MD when Bitcoin was under $10,000, and I've been on his podcast a bunch of times, and I was promoting Bitcoin as an alternative investment with a very high Sharp ratio. So um, risk adjusted return. You buy very little of it, and it can have an outsized impact on your portfolio. And just as like uh, Pascal's wager, financial wager sort of question, where, well, even if you don't believe in it, if you just own a little bit of it, like 1% of your portfolio, if it goes to zero, who cares? You lose 1%. Yeah, no big deal. But if it goes up 10x or 100x, you're going to double your portfolio, or at least increase by 10%, which can be very meaningful. And so I still don't know what's going to happen, of course, but I have a lot of conviction in it. And I'll be the first to say that there's, you know, risks to any investment. And I think we have to be level headed and realistic about it. But that being said, I've bought $100 of Bitcoin a day for many, many, many years.
No, you are hodling.
I'm hodling. Yeah, I don't sell Bitcoin. I haven't sold Bitcoin.
Yeah, and I think philosophically the volatility involved with Bitcoin as well. It's great for someone like me, right? Where I'm like just starting out in my career, don't make any money, right? Maybe a little money in residency, but it provides that like pathway for entry for someone like me that might not have like the capital right away, but knows that I want to build like a portfolio in Bitcoin as like,
Yeah.
you get like 40, 50% drops and, it seems terrible as an investment for people who got it at like the peak, right? But then for someone like me that thinks fundamentally it's a good it's a vehicle for value exchange between people, right? It seems great to me, right? Because how would you value the US dollar, right? Or how would you value gold? Like you can look at the market cap of it or whatever for gold at least and say that this much amount of the world's value is placed in gold. When you see Bitcoin as like a cryptocurrency, or what's the difference between, when people ask me like what's the difference between like Dogecoin and Bitcoin, like why can't I start my own coin? And you know what's the difference between that and starting my own coin? It's difficult to have conversations at times with that when you philosophically believe in Bitcoin, but there might be certain things that are true, right? I agree. You can create your own coin and maybe it will become the next Bitcoin, right? Possibly, but it's like the same argument as gold, right? Like, why did gold become what it is today? It could have been silver, it could have been platinum, it could have been lead, right? But happened to be gold because there's some properties of good money that we can see in gold, right? Like store of value, medium of exchange, unit of account, durability, portability, divisibility, scarcity, right? But Bitcoin has that momentum, right? It's moving forward. And I actually took a game theory class this past quarter, and I see a lot of parallels to how adoption of Bitcoin functions in relation to what we learned in game theory. People don't necessarily have to understand it, but if there's this implied value inherent within it, and that's, nation states are potentially your enemies or your rival nation states buy into this, having this treasury within your Bitcoin treasury within your country, it starts like this cascade of events that just leads to mass Bitcoin adoption that you necessarily would not have starting your own cryptocurrency, and I really like the potential or prospect of what it can be. I'm not sure if it would ever get there. I'd like to believe that it would.
Well, and you brought up some really interesting points. And first off, if you make your own crypto, then who's going to benefit the most? Well, you are, because it's centralized, because you own the most of it, right? Well, Bitcoin is totally decentralized, and no single person owns more than a few percent of Bitcoin. And even that, those people are either dead or the Bitcoin are lost. So it's not like someone owns 40 or 50% of the Bitcoin. Like XRP, people own 50% of XRP, like the foundation that runs it. So there's millions and millions of coins because everybody wants to start their own coin, but there's only one, uh, you know, truly decentralized, distributed ledger. And the underlying technology for all of these digital assets is blockchain. And blockchain is fascinating because it solves some real problems as a distributed ledger, and it creates a digital measuring stick. It makes that possible. And so whether the use case is money or patient EMR records, which hopefully eventually we have in a decentralized way, decentralized open systems always beat out closed systems over time, especially when the technology is like a 10x improvement. But Bitcoin is special and in its own category and different than all the other crypto because it's not controlled by any one party or group. It's a consensus run um, mechanism, and it's really fascinating. Now, whether or not it works or it's fully adopted, I don't know. But for the last 16 years, it's followed like this a pretty consistent model, which is the power law. And it's the only one that's been following that. The others have broken down or there's been problems. They all suffer third party trust issues. They're not disintermediated. Bitcoin, the problem that, Bitcoin solves is, let's say that I live in, Nigeria or Argentina or somewhere where my currency is going to zero. Well, it might be illegal to buy gold. It might be or if you can only buy so much of it. You can't travel with it. Like imagine if you had, a few gold bars. You're not allowed to travel on it through the airport without more than $10,000 in cash or bearer assets. So you could be stopped. I mean, we all hear stories about people literally being stopped because the X-ray machine caught like a gold bar up their butt. And so, you can't travel with gold. Let's say there was horrible war in your country and you needed to leave. You can't take your stocks. You can't take your home. You can't take your bank account. You can't take your credit card, really. You can't take anything that is really of value. And so, when people were leaving Nazi Germany, for example, they left everything and they started completely anew in a different country. Well, now I can just store, 12 words in my head. I have my words totally memorized. It's not that hard. And I can go to Australia or New Zealand or South Africa, anywhere I want, and I can carry a fortune with me. Just I could lose everything and be transplanted, and nobody can take that away from me. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could be like tortured and and those sorts of things, but someone could do that anyway if I had a safe or I had gold or I had stocks or any kind of or cash or any kind of money like that. And the other thing that Bitcoin solves for is it's completely scarce. It's the first time in the world ever that we have a static measuring stick. And gold did a pretty good analog job of this, but you can't like shave off a little piece of gold to buy a cup of coffee, but you can use 0.000015 Bitcoin, or whatever to buy a meal. So, gold is all the gold in the world can fit in two Olympic sized swimming pools. And gold was chosen because it has just the right amount of scarcity and just the right amount of constant mining from the earth. And it's a very special metal. But imagine that we harvest it from an asteroid or that has 6 gazillion ounces of gold, or we find a mountain made of gold somewhere in the world that's going to flood the market. And so, and much like diamonds, there's these physical kind of reality, scientific, technological breakthroughs where we can actually make lab grown diamonds now. So the cost of diamonds are going to zero because they're indistinguishable from real diamonds. And gold, I saw that they've already been able to make some gold out of like a different atomic element. And it's only a matter of time, I think, before that becomes something where they can just make gold. But you can't make more Bitcoin. Bitcoin is totally scarce, and there will never be more than 21 million of them. For context, there's like 60 million millionaires, and so I think it would make sense for everybody to own 1% of their portfolio, or if they're aggressive, 2 to 5% in Bitcoin, because if they lose it, no big deal. But if like the thing is, we all think we're right. We all think we have the answers. The fact is, nobody knows what the heck is going on with anything. This life is really transitory. It's short. And the fact of the matter is, things happen in this like global, large kind of tectonic way that each one of us is like maybe an independent neuron in the social human consciousness. And we don't get to control whether or not Bitcoin wins or loses ultimately. It's incentives. And so, it's like, since I don't know, and I obviously have a bias because I've studied it. But since we don't know, it really makes sense to have a little, just in case you're wrong or just in case you're right. And Bitcoin ends up replacing all of the inferior current yardsticks, which change shape. Like whenever you try and measure something, you want a yardstick that's always the same size. Bitcoin is always the same size. Everything else changes shape and is totally malleable. So, like a coffee now, how much is a coffee worth? Well, it's $6 or $7. How much was it 20 years ago? $2 or $3. How much was it 40, 50 years ago? 60 cents. And so that sort of changing yardstick, I get into this in my book, changes our opinion of our own value, which, because we measure value in net worth, which is kind of sad. We measure it in dollars. We measure GDP in dollars. And so I really think that there's an intellectual, philosophical benefit for humanity with Bitcoin. vis-a-vis self-actualization and our ability to kind of um, have a more peaceful, lower stress, not always in the hamster wheel kind of life where we can be creative, we can focus on love and joy. Right now, we're all focused on making money and escaping the hamster wheel and how am I going to make enough money? And it's hard to make ends meet. And, we should be living in true abundance. So, because of technology. But, anyways, I've gone quite a distance there. So I'll shut up for a little bit.
Definitely, it was great insights, a lot to unpack there. I think I wanted to start off with the decentralization aspect that you talked about and being applied to EMRs. I find like the use cases for blockchain quite fascinating, especially in a healthcare space, because of the fact that you describe in EMRs. That's one use case. I've always thought, data ownership was a very interesting
Yeah.
in healthcare, right? Because it's not really defined. Like if you put something in the EMR, right, and there's like major EMR systems that kind of have ownership over what you place in their system, right, over that note, the information associated with that note. But then the information itself is about a patient, right? And so is the health information being put on that note owned by the electronic health records, like the software system housing that? Is it the patient or is it the physician that's collecting that information from the patient, right? And so I think there's a lot to unpack there in the sense of like who gets that ownership, how can we track that data across time, because with fragmented EHR systems and everything too, right? If a patient goes to one health system, they have their own EMR. They go to a different small clinic, they have their own EMR or lack thereof. And so
Mhm.
it's very hard tracking patients across time and having data fidelity, or, like the labs or tests that you run on a patient, really keeping track of that if you're not integrated with one system. And then that opens like the question of like the can of worms of like, is healthcare consolidation good because it can be integrated in one system, right? Because
Mhm.
that's one possible solution that you can think of for making care integrated. But then again, that brings into question data ownership, autonomy, and agency for people within that system as well. A lot to unpack there. I just wanted to provide my thought for that and just what your thoughts are on the utility of blockchain or these within healthcare and how you see these problems that I just laid out in terms of like data ownership and who has ownership over that data that we collect in healthcare.
Yeah, aside that is a really good kind of overview and summary of not only the problem of where we're going, ways to think about this. Ownership is obviously super important. I think most people would agree that foundationally it should be the patient's data and the patient's information. But what we also have to consider, and that you didn't mention, is what data is being incentivized and optimized for by these EMRs. And right now, it's data for billing and coding. So, how much of an EMR record is actually really fundamentally important for the patient? And then, how much is used for insurance, coding, billing, leveling, all of those. So the data is kind of carrying the patient's crucial information for us as providers as like a small backpack on this mountain of medical legal garbled gobbledygook that's like there to protect us from liability and doesn't do that. And then all this coding and all these ridiculous rules and hoops we have to jump through. So when we code a patient's chart, we're not just relating to another doctor or another provider or another or a nurse or someone or the patient what's going on. It's not just like distilled, concentrated, important, crucial data, which it should be. Right now it's like a preponderance of data that we don't even need or care about, but that helps us bill and code and make money for insurance companies, and it's absolutely awful. So but the main real world where the rubber hits the road problem that we want to solve with blockchain and decentralized open systems and ultimately a decentralized open EMR which the patient controls and carries with them wherever they go is I'll give you an example. I'm an ER doc. No matter where I've practiced, people come in from other systems, other healthcare systems, other closed systems. And it's like, well, I'm seen over at the hospital down the street, or I'm visiting from Australia, or I'm visiting from New York. I ran out of my medications, and it's like, oh well, we need to get your medical records, and like an hour later, if we're lucky, they're faxed over to us. Sometimes we never get them. Sometimes it's impossible to get them because the medical records department is closed at another facility or a rural facility or something like that. And so, like we miss the crucial pieces of the data. And now with the cell phones and with everything that we have, how on earth do you not just have an app with all of your most important healthcare data? Everyone should have this, and it can be protected in a blockchain capacity. This, with Shore 256 out with crypto in encryption. And your data is totally private. It's totally yours and owned by you. And it's no matter where you go, you can just give it to a healthcare provider and they can instantly see the most relevant parts of your history. Because I have patients come in and they're like, oh, I'm having, some shoulder pain. I was lifting a box and it's been hurting for a couple days. Okay, great. Where are you from? Well, I'm from Florida. Like, do you have any health problems? No, not really. I had some in the past. I can't really remember. Okay, well, let's get an X-ray of your shoulder. Okay, get the X-ray. It's normal, and you send them home. Maybe you give them a shot of Toradol or you give them some NSAIDs. Well, guess what? In their medical record, they had a stent last year, like that they literally don't tell you about because for whatever reason, they don't tell you about it. Problems like that could be solved immediately by a patient saying, oh, well, here, just like, I'll text you or whatever the technology is. There's a million different ways to get it to the physician. And then it's like, oh, you didn't tell me you had a heart attack last year, that you had a stent. And it's like, oh, I did. I had a stent. I forgot to tell you. And I'm like, well, that's super relevant. And I would have gotten an EKG and all this other stuff and troponins. And so like, and you'd be shocked at how, often it is that when you go to the ER, you're a deer in the headlights and you forget the most basic stuff. Oh, I've been on Lipitor for 20 years. You forget something so obvious and you just hyper focus in on what you're feeling or doing. So medical records can be life-saving, especially in the emergency department, and we don't get them frequently. And so, a decentralized EMR predicated on blockchain technology is like a no-brainer. But of course, the problem right now is, we have corporate overlords, and the system is incentivized for profit at every level of the system, and that's really sad and archaic and part of an old system. And I believe that there will be a new paradigm of decentralization that will bring with it true abundance. And I think part of that will be decentralized everything. All the centralized structures of today, including government, religion, money, social, all those that live in these large, structured, centralized silos will be decentralized. And I think that will be the next phase for humanity. And I'm very optimistic about it.
Definitely, that does sound quite optimistic. And just going a little deeper into that, you've argued, and you kind of alluded to it, with fiat money and healthcare both suffering from misaligned incentives. How do you think they're linked, and is there any way to reconcile the two? Is there one solution that would apply to both, or how are they different, and like how we could approach that?
Well, yeah, I've talked about this in other podcasts, and I think we're evolutionarily designed to hoard resources and be competitive. And the reason is we used to live in caves, right? And we used to compete for mates and we still compete for mates, but we used to compete for resources. Winter was always coming around the corner, starvation. We lived to be 30 years old if we were lucky on average, right? That was the life expectancy was, like, for hundreds of thousands of years. We were just animals. The next tribe over was going to kill us and take our resources, and it was in their best interest to do so. And so, tribes became kingdoms and countries, and ultimately We would go to war with one another over resources, over land boundaries, all these things. Well, technology changes all of that because it creates true abundance. And what I mean by that is technology is like hyper deflationary, right? Like it removes the need to work. It removes the need to toil and to spend, 14 hours a day in the fields doing whatever it is, farming or whatever, because machines can do it, and everything gets cheaper over time with technology, or it should, but it doesn't because our incentives are still aligned with get as much as you can out of the system and hoard it and become as rich and as powerful as you can to defend your tribe and defend your family or defend, your station in this reality. And I think that that's an outdated and useless incentive in a world that is rushing towards true technological abundance. And when I say that, there's very obvious examples everywhere. Like light bulbs used to be incandescent, now they're, in electricity, and filaments would break, and now they're LED, and they can last 10 times as long and they cost 100 times less. Why is our energy bills the same? Well, we use more energy for cell phones and but cell phones are always, the batteries are always getting better, and so on and so forth. And so, like, we can make enough food, we can make enough housing, we can do all these things with the resources we have, but instead, and I have no problem with capitalism, but I think capitalism is also a derivative of this incentive problem. But now we have billionaires. I saw Elon Musk, has $600 billion, and I love Elon Musk. I mean, he's a visionary. And but what do you do with $600 billion? What do you do with $1 trillion? Like, especially when there's people who are dying, and like the lowest level of society is very low, and there's true poverty, and there's people who can't afford healthcare, and healthcare is the number one bankrupter of people and financial ruin in this country. It's insane. So I think that as technology continues to accelerate, which is what technology does, these old systems of fiat money, which is like a technology based on inflation and devaluation, like fiat money and inflation, they make people want to spend money. Like you're disincentivized to save money because the value of your money always goes down. If so, like when I first started 20 years ago medicine, I was like, man, if I get like $1.5 million, I'll have more than enough to retire forever. That was my number. 5 years later, I was like, man, that's crazy. I guess I'm going to need like $2 million or two and a half. I mean, and now it's like most docs I talk to want 5 to 10 million to retire comfortably. By the time they get 5 to 10 million dollars, it's going to be worth 2 to 3 million, $2 to 4 million or something like that. Every 7 years, our money is worth about half as much. And we saw that in a big way between COVID and now, and because we had a massive blast of inflation. So when you have a yardstick that is constantly changing and constantly being devalued, we are being pushed out the moral risk curve to be incentivized to get more money at any cost. And that means making cryptos and scamming people. And that means robbing banks. And that means pig butchering scams. And that means like all these bad things that people wouldn't need to do if they just had a money system that aligned with technology and created that became more valuable as time went forward. Like imagine if your savings went up in value, and so you save now, and that those savings you knew that they were going to be worth more instead of working more and more until you're 70, which is what the old system wanted because it prioritized production and progress. It's best to keep someone like me, who's a like ultra experienced emergency room physician. Like if I had 50 $100 million, would I be working in the emergency department nonstop? Like, no, of course not. Maybe I would, and I mean, I'm just using that as an example, but I'm saying, like, you don't want people retiring when they're 30 because they're so wealthy and they know they're going to get more and more wealthy and they're comfortable. You want people getting more and more skilled, working until they die, and then dying as quickly as possible. So, and so that's kind of the direction society has gone. And something like Bitcoin re-incentivizes and changes the script because it's a deflationary money system with a known supply schedule. It's totally disintermediated, takes power away from the state, which has traditionally controlled money. And by the way, every state that has controlled money has failed. 49 of the last 50, and we're number 50. And we see our debt exploding, and we see we owe $36 trillion. Nobody thinks that's going to be paid back. The money system is broken. It's everything is like haywire, and people kill each other over money. So I see all of that changing, and I kind of I digressed and went in a slightly different direction. But I think to bring it back and put it all together, incentives in the past were competitive, cutthroat PvP, where we all need as many dollars as possible. And literally, there are people like who would, as a philosophical thought experiment, like push a button and kill some random person in the world for $1 million. Like a lot of people would do that, which is mind boggling and like totally immoral, obviously. But people would do that. Oh, I get $1 million. There's no consequences. You just push a button and a random person dies. But like a system like Bitcoin, or a system where your value becomes worth more if you save in Bitcoin, you're rewarded, or even if it's not Bitcoin, just a system that doesn't devalue you over time. Let's call it fair coin. Okay. And let's say it replaces Bitcoin and everybody gets an equal amount to start with. Whatever it is, we need something better than the current broken, perverted incentive system such that it fixes our moral foundation. And I think that we're going to see that be forced into reality because technology is so deflationary that a system like the current fiat inflationary system cannot survive. And a great book about that is The Price of Tomorrow by Jeff Booth, which I recommend everybody to read. It's really mind opening. And it's just about technology and how that impacts the world, because technology, you know, by Moore's laws, is exponentially increasing. We see AI now. We see how we're just running forward with technology. But we have to print more and more money to keep up with it. It's a fascinating book. Everybody should read it.
Definitely. And with that context, looking into like the problems we face in healthcare, right? With supply demand mismatches, patients not being able to get care in time. Also from like the provider perspective, like there's like this big push towards hospital employment, and like 50, 60 years ago, independent practice was like the backbone of how healthcare was practiced. How do you contextualize all of this with like the framework you brought from, your perspective on Bitcoin? Because from my perspective, I'm just starting off within this system, right? And I'm at the bottom of the totem pole, but I'm seeing all of this around me. I'm hearing voices through multiple different channels. And I'd like to think that the direction we're going is hopefully a better direction than we were going in the past, right? But then there's big arguments to be made from like the independent practice side versus like being, employed or working within a system. And it seems almost polar opposites at times, right? Like where you can either be an independent practice physician or you're hospital employed or working within a health system, and you don't have as much autonomy, right? And like for me going through this, it almost feels like I have to choose between the two, right? And I have to sacrifice autonomy for whatever like a health system or hospital employment would provide versus being an independent practice and having that agency and autonomy. How is there no middle ground? Is there no way that the two can be reconciled, or there's a better practice of healthcare through consolidation or through larger practices or larger group practices? Like, how do you see this issue? Like, what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, well, first let me say that, we're all voting with our actions, and nobody truly knows. What I can say is consolidation and centralized power structures and organization do have benefits, but they also have a lot of problems. And there was a time for a very long time in this country where people didn't really care or think about money constantly. Money wasn't that important, and I went into medicine, and for the first even through med school, I never thought about, oh, how much am I going to make if I do this specialty or this specialty, or what do I need to do to make the most money? I had student loans with a 1.8% interest rate. My student loans were, yeah, a couple $100,000. I had a scholarship to go to Tulane, and I just really spent the money on enjoying life. And it was like, and we just didn't think about money as much. And I think thinking about money is a problem. And, for me, I think that consolidated systems, their goal is optimization of certain goals. And in this whole system, the optimization is for shareholder value and growth and dollars. And so there is no optimization for patient metrics, patient care, doctor happiness, provider happiness, I should say, provider finances. And people are coming out with $500,000 in student loans at 6 or 7% interest. You really have to think about money. How am I going to get ahead? How am I going to pay this all back? I'm already 32 years old or whatever it is. It's like really gone nuts. And I would say that this reality, no matter what it is, it's very short lived. And you can either be like an NPC cog in the wheel of someone else's vision or dream or a machine. You could be like a Borg unit. You could be like one of the Borg, or you can forge your own path at the expense of unknown, lack of safety, lack of assurity. Um, but look, in medicine today, we are either witting or unwitting accomplices to a system that is the number one cause of financial ruination of our patients. And how the hell are people going to heal or get better if they are worried and stressed and they lose their home because of their medical bills? That is insane. And so whether or not we like is that, and they purposely keep us compartmentalized. Like, I don't know how much it costs to sew up somebody's face. I just do it. I get my hourly rate in the ER. I'm 1099. I'm actually leaving the ER now, and I'm starting my own clinic. And I think medicine can be done a lot better. And I think as physicians, I think we we have done a huge disservice to society by not standing firm and leading the way. And now physicians are, RVU generating, uh, uh, you know, um, workers, W 2. And so I feel very strongly that if we're going to be leaders in society, and if we're going to put in the work to shape ourselves, to improve our patients' lives, then it's incumbent on us to help optimize the system's health, not just our patients' health. And when we see the system moving towards these massive centralized power structures, you're basically building health factories that are economically draining the system. Like a third of our healthcare expenses, a third of our GDP is healthcare. And what does it cost? What our provider costs? Like 7% of all healthcare costs are for physicians and providers. That's insane. You could cut you could cut out all the administrators. You could cut out insurance. 80% of people never meet their deductibles anyway. You could cut out all this crap, trim all this fat, and reinstitute the patient doctor relationship. Doctors could make enough to pay for med school and pay back their loans. We sacrificed our 20s. You could double physician income and still cut patient expenses by 80% more. So it's like right now the system is losing. Patients are losing, doctors are losing, nurses are losing, providers are losing. And it's because we are becoming W 2 employees of these giant machines and feeding them, giving them power. None of us are part of the AMA anymore. Physician, involvement of the American Medical Association is like 12% of us are members, and they're not looking out for our interests. They're they're basically owned by the insurance companies and by other interests, and the CEO is making millions of dollars. I mean, it's like, it's insane. the way it's all gone. But I think that we can fix it and we can heal it by being genuine and authentic providers. And, it's hard because you have to put the sure thing aside and say, I'm going to use my brain, I'm going to use my compassion, my love of people, my fundamental reasons for going into medicine, and I'm going to try and make things better. And so, I think it's hard in the beginning of our careers to do that when we don't know a lot. But as we get older and older, it becomes like almost a moral imperative. And now we're starting to see real outrage against the machine itself. And I think that's good. But here's the thing, this is all happening as a substructure of it's a derivative to the base layer, which is the money system and the political ideologies and everything that got us here, which is this evolutionary incentive to hoard resources. And so it all comes back to that. And that's what I write about in my book. I think that trying to fix healthcare and trying to focus on, like, well, should we tweak this knob? Should we tweak that knob? Whether it's healthcare or food or any one of our, of our large institutions, I think all of these little attempts to fix them are happening from within the current paradigm. And it's like sitting inside of a broken car that's old and dilapidated and broken, and sitting in the passenger seat and like pushing really hard on the dashboard and adjusting the radio, trying to get the car to move forward. You can't do it because the car is broken and you're inside the car. So I think the only way that we fix everything is by ushering in a new paradigm where incentives are more aligned to help everyone. And I think that paradigm begins with decentralization.
That is quite thought provoking, actually. I have to sit with that. But as we come to the end of this episode, if, integrating everything that we talked about, if you could leave one message for the next generation of physicians, what would it be?
Yeah, this is an easy one. Be your authentic self. Be genuine to who you are and your passions. Be yourself at all costs. I mean, give up money, give up political influence, give up power, give up, you know, everything just to be yourself and make the impact that you can make in the world for your patients and for yourself. And if that means going your own way and making your own system, you know, you will be a hero in this world if you are authentic.
Dr. Kaufman, it was great having you on the podcast, and you left me with a lot to think about as well. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for coming on the Strive podcast.
Thank you, Sai. I had a great time, and you've got a great podcast. I appreciate you.